The Patriot Act, enacted after 9/11, gives law enforcement and intelligence officials the authority to intercept and obstruct potential plots against the United States. But as it turns out, FBI agents say they can't point to any terrorism cases that have been thwarted because of it. The Justice Department's Inspector General says between 2004 and 2009, the FBI tripled the amount bulk data collected from Americans, but no major developments in any cases resulted from any of it. Section 215 deals with bulk data collection. That lets the NSA collect phone records of millions of Americans not suspected of any crimes at all.
The feds will take steps to stop collecting the phone records of millions of us if Congress does not extend or replace the program by tomorrow. That's the warning from the Justice Department in a memo to congressional officials. The program has sparked a huge debate on Capitol Hill. Maybe you saw it. Republican Senator Rand Paul yesterday speaking out against it for more than 10 hours on the Senate floor. Of course, we know about the record collection only because of documents from the national security leaker, Edward Snowden.
We're giving up our privacy. We're giving up what we're supposedly fighting for in the process of fighting against terrorism.
Your critics say, look, times have changed since the Constitution was written. The founders would have never visualized how we have come so far with technology. So what happens if there's a lapse in this program and a terrorist attack happens? Will you feel guilty?
What will happen is that we'll rely on the Constitution, and the Constitution does allow for searching of records. In fact, I think sometimes we take our eye off of the prize by capturing so much information of innocent Americans. I think we lose track of actually doing the investigations that we need. The Boston bomber, the Zanarov boy, the Russians tipped us off to him. I'm all for looking at his records. Why weren't we looking at his records? Why didn't we know that he flew back to Russia?
Right.
Same with the Simpson character out of Phoenix. Yep. We knew his name.
But
we had suspicion.
Those are valid issues. But I'm just wondering if, in fact, this lapses this weekend and something happens. You know you're going to take a hit for that. So do you feel guilty if, in fact, that happens?
Right. I think it's the question is improperly worded. And what I would say is that when you look at this, and when you have looked at this, the President's Commission, as well as the Department of Justice Inspector General, they looked at this and they said, are we getting data from this bulk collection that has been useful? We've been doing it now for 10 years. Are we getting any data? And their conclusion is, after looking at the classified information, that they're not getting anything useful. There's been no breakthroughs. There has been no magic or silver bullet. We've continued to have attacks. So should the people who are collecting the information feel guilty about the attacks we've been having? We had an attack in Garland. We had an attack at the Boston Marathon. The reason I object to the question is that our freedoms are very important, but to blame one individual for an attack and say, well, who gets the blame for the Boston Marathon? It's not really fair to do it that way. But I think it's a fair question to ask, could we do a better job at gathering information than we're doing that also obeys the Bill of Rights?
There are people who couldn't agree that the sky is blue that agree on the need to rein in the NSA surveillance activities.
What it underscores is this perennial tension between civil liberties and national security. And look, some people might say he's running for president, he's posturing, but this has been a very consistent position of his for a very long time.
After midnight, our government lost its legal authority to collect vast quantities of phone records in its quest to find terrorists. But the Senate could act to restore the NSA's controversial surveillance program as soon as tomorrow. Lawmakers failed to strike a deal in a rare Sunday night session after Kentucky Senator Rand Paul intentionally held up his chamber's progress. Supporters of the bill, including former and current intelligence officials, say the Patriot Act must be reauthorized to keep Americans safe.
Why would a reasonable people take off the table tools that I believe are lawful? Why would we give up things that the professionals say keep us safer?
The tools that the government has used over the last dozen years to keep this country safe are integral to making sure that we're able to stop terrorists in their tracks.
Okay, so in a little bit of an Ace Hardware moment, you have intelligence officials, Eric, saying, keep out of our tool bag. We need these forensic data collection points to be able to track the bad guys down.
Yes, you do. And you have some of us who are saying you can still do that. You haven't lost any ability to do that. You can still get the phone records of anyone. The government can still get the phone records of anyone, even right now, after the NSA's data mining mandate expired. They just don't have the right to get the phone records of everyone all at once. They're going to need to go by the Constitution that's been good for 247,000 years right here in America. If you don't like the law, change the law, but you better do it via amending the Constitution. It is very, very clear in the Constitution that you need A, probable cause, and B, You need a name of the person that you're going to issue the warrant to if you want to go ahead and get the information. Other than that, look, the straw man argument is if you're against this, you must be okay with terrorists. And no, we're not. I'm not. I think you go after them. You go after them hard. You go after them via any means that are legal and constitutional, which would also mean if you think and you have probable cause that a mosque is talking about terror, listen in. Go ahead. Find out who they're talking to. Use the data. Use the phone lines that they're calling. Follow those people, too. But those are warrantable. You can go to the FISA court and get those things. What all that happened last night was that the United States process said, in order to continue to data mine every single American without a warrant, you're going to have to come back and show them how to do that. And that's what they're trying to do through the House right now.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right, Andrea.
I think that Rand Paul makes a very compelling case. I think he's probably the loudest and clearest voice on this. And his concerns are warranted. I mean, besides the constitutional violations, which Eric articulated, it's also questionable that it could be effective with such a wide net. Mm-hmm. And also, I think the potential for abuse is enormous. And for people to say, well, you know, there's no evidence that they abused it, sure, that's true. But we're living in an era where we saw the IRS target Americans for their political ideologies. And we know that in past, FBI directors like Edward Hoover, they've used information on people to go after them. So I think the prospect, Kimberly, for political abuse is pretty great.
It's looking for patterns, right? And if that helps them stop an attack, I don't know if it does. But I suspect that if it does help them, it's like, when are you going to take your freedom, now or later? Because if there's another attack, we're all going to be giving up more freedom.
Why do you need to give up your freedom? First,
I know we're going to give them up after an attack.
You're sure that they're not going to use this information in any way, shape, or form that you don't like? IRS, Andrea points out the IRS scandal. We spent months on this show saying, look, if they're willing to do that, what are they not willing to do? If they're willing to target conservatives,
but that's also
from the
administration
IRS level,
specific.
Hold on, let me just finish. What? No. What's the difference?
Well,
this is even bigger.
The IRS.
This is even
under the direction of President Obama.
You trust President Obama, Valerie Jarrett, Eric Holder? Knock yourself out. But what about Hillary Clinton? We have a lot of questions about her transparency, her ethics. What if she's president and she says, you know what, I want to lean a little bit into this, these conservative groups over here. Hey, NSA, do me a favor. I want to hear that. Is that conspiratorial? Maybe, but it's not. Look, no one thought the IRS was going to ever do what they did. Can I just read this? I know we're going to get Julian here, but you have to just read how specific the Fourth Amendment is. This is very specific. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
Right, but how about the circumstances where time is of the essence and exigent
They can go right
circumstances?
to the, they can go to the companies. They can go. By the way, these documents aren't going away. These are still being held by the individual internet companies and phone companies. They're told to hold. They have to hold that data.
No,
it's just that the government can't go ahead and use it at their will.
We talk about the prospect for potential abuse, which we've already seen the IRS do. We know that if it's in the wrong hands, like, oh, I don't know, a Sidney Blumenthal in the administration.
Or a Richard Nixon. It doesn't have to just
it's already happening. It's already happening. I pulled up an article from Reuters from last year. This was when the U.S., via the DEA, was directing its agents to cover up a program that it's using to investigate Americans. So what they're doing is they're using intercepts through the NSA to go after people they perceive are the bad guys. And then they don't have to tell the defense or the prosecution how they got that information. It's not the way that government's supposed to work.
The first duty of our national government is to protect the homeland, and this has been an effective tool, along with many others, and the Patriot Act ought to be reauthorized, as is.
You know, you have people just making things up that the NSA is sitting and listening to people's conversations. They're not.
The next time that any politician, senator, congressman, talking head, whatever it may be, stands up and says that the U.S. government is listening to your phone calls or going through your phone records, they're lying.
There is this argument that this whole collecting up everything on all the Americans and putting it somewhere for them to look at later, really they can't do, because of this weird, obscure, old piece of paper. They call it the Constitution. And the Fox urges the Senate is right now voting on whether to restore some of the government's controversial surveillance programs. The bill that the Senate is taking up would end the government's practice of sweeping up all Americans' call logs. But it would be exactly the same thing, because the phone companies would do it. And the NSA would still be there, and they would still have access to it. And those fake courts, they call the FISA courts, those would still make all the decisions. So they'd still be all up in your business. And the White House and the Republican leadership on the Hill are now in lockstep on a matter that destroys your freedoms, according to the reporting of our own Judge Andrew Napolitano, and we'll get into the details of it. The feds could search them with a court order. Again, the court is from the FISA courts, which are not real or constitutional courts, according to Judge Andrew Napolitano. It's a win for privacy advocates, sort of. It isn't a win for privacy advocates because there is no privacy in this matter. And critics, including the Republican senator and presidential candidate Rand Paul, insist it does not do nearly enough to stop government snooping. On the other side, some senators argue that the bill goes too far in limiting the government's spying powers. Wow. Again, it's worth noting those surveillance programs have never stopped a single specific terror attack, and according to the Department of Justice itself, have never aided in the prosecution of a single terror investigation. Josh Earnest has been good enough to join us, the White House press secretary who spoke on these matters earlier today. Josh, good to see you. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Shep. How are you?
I'm great. How does the president, and how do you, for that matter, feel about being lockstep with the Bush administration and the leadership in the House and the Senate and the Republicans?
Well, Shep, what the president has supported for more than a year and a half are important reforms to these programs that would put in place civil liberties protections for the American people.
What civil liberties protections, Josh?
The president believes that the USA Freedom Act strikes the right balance of putting in place these civil liberties protections, while at the same time ensuring that our law enforcement professionals have exactly the tools that they need that they say are important to keeping the country safe.
Our chief judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, says there is no difference. There's a semantics difference. The records are now being held by the phone companies, but of course, the NSA would have computers in the air there. The NSA would have access, and the NSA would have no real court oversight. They'd be able to do exactly what they want to do whenever they want to, whether anyone is suspected of anything or not. Why is it okay, from the perspective of our constitutional expert president, for the rights of the people to be trampled in this way, according to Judge Andrew Napolitano?
Well, Shep, obviously the administration strongly disagrees with what Mr. Napolitano had to say. It would allow our national security professionals with a legitimate court order to search those records to try to conduct terror investigations.
You said a legitimate court order, and of course on that you mean the FISA courts. The FISA courts were created by the Bush administration and are, again, according to Judge Napolitano, who's no left-wing nut, not legitimate courts. And they're not legitimate courts by any standards, he says, for the following reasons. The FISA court has nobody standing up against it from the NSA. It's the NSA versus nobody. The FISA courts are not required to keep records of anything that they do. And the FISA courts have had 34,000 requests for, yeah, it's okay to go spy on people, and 12 times out of 34,000, the FISA courts have said no. Judge Napolitano argues, and if you read the Constitution, it appears he's right, that they're illegitimate. They've never passed constitutional muster.
Well, Shep, obviously we don't agree with that, and 338 Democrats in the House of Representatives, 338 Democrats and Republicans in the House of Representatives don't agree with that. Obviously, the Intel committees are briefed on these programs. It's important for us to have judicial oversight, so a third branch of government who's independently assessing that the federal government has the authority to do what it says it's going to do. There are also independent voices inside the executive branch that are providing oversight over these programs. These are the kinds of protections that are in place to ensure that the civil liberties of the American people are not violated, while at the same time, our national security professionals can capitalize on technology and use information to conduct investigations and ultimately protect the American people.
Yet, this is still a dragnet. The president surely knows of this Fourth Amendment that says you can't just gather up willy-nilly information on people who aren't suspected of doing anything wrong, Josh.
That's correct, Shep, and the president does not believe that we should be collecting information willy-nilly against people. That's why we have the FISA court in place.
This soaking up of all the data and saving it is something that the Constitution says you can't do. And I just wonder, since the president used to say the same thing before being elected president, what has changed? Does he know something? I'm sure he knows a few things by now that we don't know. But this FISA court business, you know, you can lean on that as long as you want, but someday history will say FISA court is not real and FISA court was not legitimate. Hey, breaking news from the U.S. Senate. We've been talking today about the USA Patriot Act and the revisions that have been made and all that's happened on Capitol Hill. Where today there were these 2 amendments that were put forth by this man, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. There were amendments put forward. So the Senate voted on one thing. I should say the House voted on one thing. They brought it to the Senate. The Senate was trying to put amendments on it, which could have screwed things up as it went back to the House. But the Senate voted down those amendments. So it looks like we're closer to this new version of the USA Patriot Act, which is now going to be called the USA Freedom Act, which is basically the same thing as it was before, except now for the NSA to spy on everybody, it does so from its own offices while using computers that are linked to the telecom companies. The differences are very few. The Republican leadership and the president are in lockstep on this matter, just as George W. Bush was back in the day. They say it protects our freedoms. Judge Napolitano says that's a lie.